The auctioneer's gavel cracked against the wooden podium like a gunshot, and Sarah Owens felt her stomach drop as she stood on the platform in the scorching New Mexico sun, knowing that her life was about to change forever. "Gentlemen, we have here a fine cook, excellent with bread, stews, and can handle a kitchen as well as any woman in 3 territories," the auctioneer bellowed, gesturing towards Sarah with a theatrical sweep of his arm. "Starting bid at $50 for a year's contract." Sarah's cheeks burned with humiliation as she stood there in her worn calico dress, her dark blonde hair pulled back in a simple bun. The year was 1878, and she had arrived in Abiquiu, New Mexico, just 2 weeks prior with nothing but a carpetbag and desperate hope. The mining company that had promised her legitimate work as a cook had gone bankrupt, leaving her stranded and penniless. When the company's assets were liquidated, the workers' contracts had been sold to the highest bidders, a practice that made Sarah's skin crawl but was perfectly legal in this harsh land. The crowd of men gathered in the town square murmured and shifted, eyeing her with varying degrees of interest. Most looked like ranch hands or miners, their faces weathered by sun and hard living. Sarah kept her eyes fixed on the horizon, trying to maintain whatever dignity she had left. $50, called out a gruff voice from the back. 60, countered another. The bidding continued, and Sarah felt like livestock being sold at market. She had never imagined her life would come to this. Back in Ohio, she had been a respectable woman, working in her aunt's boarding house. But when her aunt passed away and the creditors came calling, Sarah had nothing left. The advertisements promising work out west had seemed like her only option. $100. The voice cut through the murmuring crowd like a knife, deep and commanding. Sarah's eyes found the speaker. He was a tall man, probably in his late 20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at the collar of his work shirt. His face was handsome but weathered, with a strong jaw and eyes that looked almost gray in the bright sunlight. He wore simple rancher's clothes, dusty boots, and a worn hat that he held in his hands. There was something in his expression that made Sarah's heart skip, not from fear exactly, but from an intensity she could not quite name. $100 from Mr. Hammond, the auctioneer announced with satisfaction. "Do I hear 110? The crowd had gone quiet. That was apparently a significant sum for a cook's contract. 110, said a portly man with a cruel mouth that made Sarah's stomach turn. 150, the tall rancher said immediately, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. The portly man shook his head and stepped back, clearly unwilling to go higher. The auctioneer looked around expectantly, but no other bids came. Going once, going twice, sold to Mr. Matthew Hammond for $150. The gavel cracked down again, and Sarah felt the world tilt slightly beneath her feet. The rancher moved through the crowd toward the platform, and Sarah noticed he walked with a slight limp, favoring his left leg. When he reached her, he looked up and his gray eyes met hers directly. "Name's Matthew Hammond," he said quietly, his voice much gentler than it had been when bidding. "I own a cattle ranch about 10 miles north of town. I promise you, miss, I'm not a cruel man. I need a cook, and I'll treat you fair." Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. What choice did she have? At least he did not look at her the way the portly man had, like a piece of meat. Matthew paid the auctioneer, and the man handed him a document, the contract that now bound Sarah to work for him for 1 year. As they walked toward a wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses, Matthew cleared his throat. "I did not catch your name, miss." "Sarah Owens," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "Well, Miss Owens, let me help you up." He offered his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. His palm was calloused and warm, the hand of a man who worked hard for his living. The wagon ride out of Abiquiu was mostly silent. Sarah sat stiffly on the bench beside Matthew, acutely aware of his presence. The landscape rolled past, vast and beautiful in a stark way that she was still getting used to. The red earth, the distant mountains, the endless sky, it was all so different from Ohio's green hills and forests. "The ranch is called the Double H," Matthew finally said as they bounced along the rutted road. "It's been in my family for about 8 years now. My father started it, but he passed 3 years back. My mother followed him not long after. It's just me now with 4 ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse." "I'm sorry for your losses," Sarah said quietly. He nodded, his jaw tightening. "Thank you, they were good people." He paused, then continued, "The hands are decent men. They won't bother you. But I will tell you straight, Miss Owens, we have been living on beans and bad coffee for too long. I can handle cattle and horses, but I cannot cook worth a damn." Despite everything, Sarah felt a small smile tug at her lips. "I can cook, Mr. Hammond. That much I can promise you. Please call me Matthew." He glanced at her briefly before returning his attention to the road. "And may I call you Sarah?" She considered this. Formality might provide some protection, some distance. But something about his tone, respectful and almost shy, made her nod. Yes, that would be fine. As they crested a rise, the Double H came into view. The main house was a sturdy structure of adobe and wood, larger than Sarah had expected. A wide porch wrapped around the front, offering shade. Behind it stood a barn, several corrals with horses, and a smaller building that must be the bunkhouse. Trees had been planted near the house, still young but offering some greenery against the red earth. "It's not fancy, but it's solid," Matthew said, and Sarah heard a note of pride in his voice. "It's more than I expected," Sarah admitted. As they pulled up to the house, 4 men emerged from the barn, clearly curious about their boss's return. Matthew set the brake and climbed down, then came around to help Sarah. His hands were gentle as he lifted her down, and he released her the moment her feet touched the ground. "Boys, this is Miss Sarah Owens. She'll be our new cook. I expect you to be respectful and helpful." Matthew's voice carried authority, and the men nodded immediately. "Yes, sir, Mr. Hammond," said the oldest of them, a man with silver in his dark beard. "Name's Tom Reeves, miss. Pleased to meet you." The others introduced themselves. Juan Gonzalez, young and friendly-faced; Pete Morris, quiet with kind eyes; and Sam Tucker, barely 20 with an eager smile. They all seemed genuinely pleased to have a cook, and Sarah felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders. Matthew showed her into the house, and Sarah was pleasantly surprised by what she found. The main room was spacious, with a large fireplace, comfortable furniture that showed wear but had been well made, and windows that let in plenty of light. The kitchen was generous, with a good iron stove, plenty of work surface, and shelves stocked with basics. "My mother's domain," Matthew said softly as Sarah examined the kitchen. "She would be glad to see it used properly again. I have kept the pantry stocked as best I could, though I confess I do not always know what a kitchen needs." Sarah ran her hand over the smooth wooden counter. She could feel the ghost of another woman here, someone who had loved this space. "It's a good kitchen. I'll be able to work well here." "Your room is this way." Matthew led her down a short hallway. He opened a door to reveal a small but clean bedroom with a bed covered in a colorful quilt, a dresser, a washstand, and even a small window with curtains. "This was the guest room. It's yours now. The necessary is out back, and there's a pump in the kitchen and another by the barn." Sarah set her carpetbag on the bed, overwhelmed by the simple comfort of the room. She had feared she might be sleeping in a storage room or worse. "Thank you," she said, turning to face Matthew. "This is more than generous." He shifted uncomfortably as though unused to gratitude. "You'll earn your keep, I'm sure. The men and I usually eat at sunup, noon, and sundown. If you need anything for the kitchen, make a list and we will get supplies in town." "I'll start supper soon," Sarah said. "If you can tell me what you have on hand." Relief crossed Matthew's face. "That would be wonderful. I will show you the pantry and the root cellar." That evening, Sarah prepared her first meal for the Double H Ranch. She found potatoes, onions, carrots, some dried beef, and flour. It was not much to work with, but she made a hearty stew and biscuits that rose golden and fluffy from the oven. When she rang the bell Matthew had shown her, the men came quickly, their faces eager. They ate in the large main room around a table that could seat 8. Sarah served them and was about to take her plate to the kitchen when Matthew gestured to an empty chair. "Sit with us, Sarah. You are not a servant, you are our cook. There's a difference." She hesitated, then sat. The men ate with focused dedication, and the sounds of appreciation were the best compliment Sarah could have asked for. "Miss Owens, this is the best meal I have had in 2 years," Tom said seriously, mopping up stew with his third biscuit. "It is better than what my own mama used to make," Juan added, then looked stricken. "Do not tell her I said that if you ever meet her." Everyone laughed, and Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest. This was not the terrible fate she had feared when standing on that auction platform. These seemed like good men, and Matthew Hammond, there was something about him that made her curious rather than afraid. After dinner, the hands returned to the bunkhouse, and Sarah cleaned the kitchen while Matthew sat at the table, working on account books. The domestic scene felt strange but not unpleasant. "Sarah," Matthew said as she finished wiping down the stove, "I want you to know that contract. I know how it must have felt being auctioned like that. I am not a man who thinks he owns people. You work for me, yes, but you are free to leave the property, to go to town, to live your life within reason. I just ask that you do your job and do not leave me without a cook suddenly." Sarah turned to look at him, surprised by his words. "That is more than fair, Matthew." He met her eyes and something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps the beginning of trust. "Good. Then we will get along just fine." The days settled into a rhythm over the next few weeks. Sarah rose before dawn to start breakfast. The men were always grateful and complimentary, which made the hard work worthwhile. She found herself taking pride in the meals she created, expanding beyond simple fare as Matthew brought back supplies from town. She baked bread, made pies from dried apples, created stews and roasts that had the men singing her praises. In the quiet hours of the afternoon, when the midday meal was done and supper was still hours away, Sarah found time to explore the ranch. She walked among the young trees, sat on the porch watching the horses, and occasionally helped with small tasks like mending or organizing the pantry. Matthew was often working nearby, fixing fences, training horses, or managing the cattle with his men. Sarah found herself watching him sometimes, noticing the capable way he moved despite his limp, the kindness with which he treated the animals, the respect the ranch hands showed him. He was younger than she had first thought, probably only 28 or 29, just a few years older than her own 25 years. One afternoon, as Sarah sat on the porch snapping green beans that Juan had brought from town, Matthew rode up on a beautiful chestnut mare. He dismounted with practiced ease and walked over, removing his hat. "Afternoon, Sarah." "Afternoon, Matthew. You look pleased about something." He smiled, and it transformed his usually serious face. "We got a good price for the cattle we sold to the fort. It means we will have a comfortable winter." He paused, then added, "It also means I can afford to get proper supplies. I thought maybe tomorrow you and I could go to town together. You could pick out what you need for the kitchen yourself. Sarah's heart gave an unexpected flutter. I would like that. I have been making do, but there are some things that would make cooking easier. Then it's settled. We will leave after breakfast. The trip to town the next day was pleasant. Matthew drove the wagon and they talked more easily than they ever had before. Sarah learned that he had grown up in Texas, that his father had been a cavalry soldier before becoming a rancher, that Matthew himself had served briefly before a horse accident had injured his leg and sent him home. "You miss it? The cavalry?" Sarah asked. Matthew shook his head. "No. I had seen enough fighting, enough death. I wanted to build something instead of destroy. The ranch is that for me." "I understand," Sarah said softly. "I wanted to build a life too. I suppose that is why I came west. Are you sorry you did?" His gray eyes found hers with genuine concern. Sarah considered the question carefully. "I was sorry when I stood on that auction block, but now I think perhaps things happened the way they were meant to. Your ranch, the people there, it's not a bad place to be." Something in Matthew's expression shifted, softened. "I am glad you think so, Sarah." In town, Matthew was patient as Sarah examined supplies, never complaining about the cost or the time. She selected spices, sugar, molasses, dried fruits, and vegetables. At one point, she hesitated over a vanilla extract, thinking it an extravagance, but Matthew took it from her hand and added it to their purchases. "You make us happy with your cooking," he said simply. "You should have what you need." As they were loading the wagon, a woman's voice called out, "Matthew Hammond, you did not tell me you had gotten married." Sarah turned to see a handsome woman in her 40s approaching, her face friendly and curious. Matthew's ears turned red. "Mrs. Henderson, this is Miss Sarah Owens. She is our cook at the Double H." Mrs. Henderson's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Your cook? Matthew Hammond, when are you going to stop being stubborn and find yourself a wife? You are not getting any younger and that ranch needs a woman's permanent touch." "Mrs. Henderson," Matthew said, his discomfort evident, "please do not embarrass Sarah." But Sarah found herself smiling at the older woman's boldness. "It is nice to meet you, Mrs. Henderson. Do you live in Abiquiu?" "All my life, dear. And please, if you need anything, or just want some female company, you come find me. I run the general store with my husband." She leaned in conspiratorially. "And between you and me, I think you are doing more than just cooking if you have got Matthew blushing like a schoolboy." "Mrs. Henderson." Matthew protested, but there was no real anger in his voice. The woman laughed and patted Sarah's arm. "You come visit me, dear, I mean it." As they drove back to the ranch, Sarah felt emboldened by Mrs. Henderson's warmth. "She seems very fond of you. She knew my parents well. She has been trying to marry me off for 3 years now." Matthew's tone was rueful. "And you are not interested in marrying?" Sarah asked, then immediately regretted the bold question. "I am sorry, that was too personal. No, it is all right." Matthew was quiet for a moment, his hands steady on the reins. "I suppose I have not met the right woman, and after my parents passed, I was so focused on keeping the ranch going that I did not have time to think about courting. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "most women take one look at a limping rancher with more cattle than conversation and run the other direction." "I think you converse just fine," Sarah said softly. "And the limp does not define you. Anyone can see you are a good man, Matthew Hammond." He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gray eyes made Sarah's breath catch. "Thank you, Sarah. That means more than you know." Something had shifted between them on that trip to town, and both of them felt it. Over the following weeks, Matthew found more reasons to be near the house, to talk with Sarah as she cooked, to sit on the porch with her in the evenings after the hands had gone to the bunkhouse. They talked about their pasts, their hopes, their fears. Sarah learned that Matthew dreamed of expanding the ranch, of raising not just cattle but also horses for the cavalry. Matthew learned that Sarah had always wanted a family of her own, children and a home filled with love. One evening, about 2 months after Sarah's arrival, a sudden summer storm rolled in. The wind howled and rain lashed against the windows. Sarah was cleaning up from supper when lightning cracked so close that the whole house seemed to shake. She jumped, her heart racing. "It is all right," Matthew said, appearing at her side. "The house is solid. We are safe." But another crack of thunder came, even louder, and Sarah found herself gripping Matthew's arm without thinking. He did not pull away. Instead, he covered her hand with his own. "Come sit by the fire," he said gently. "The kitchen can wait." They sat together on the sofa, the fire crackling warmly while the storm raged outside. They were sitting closer than they ever had before, and Sarah was acutely aware of Matthew's presence, the warmth of him, the solid strength. "I have been thinking," Matthew said quietly, his eyes on the fire. "Your contract is for a year, but that seems like a foolish arrangement now." Sarah's heart sank. Was he going to send her away? "Have I done something wrong?" He turned to her, confusion clear on his face. "No, Sarah, you have done everything right. That is what I mean. The contract makes you sound like hired help, but you have become so much more than that. You have made this house a home again. You have made the men happy. You have made me," he paused, swallowing hard. "You have made me happier than I have been in years." "Matthew," Sarah whispered, not sure what to say. He took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "I know this might be too soon. I know we have only known each other for 2 months. But Sarah, I have come to care for you deeply, more than I thought possible, and I wondered, I hoped, that maybe you might feel something similar." Sarah's eyes burned with sudden tears. "I do. I have tried tried to remember that I am just your cook, that this is a job. But Matthew, you have been so kind, so good. How could I not come to care for you?" The smile that spread across Matthew's face was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Then I have a question to ask you, and please know you can say no. I will not hold it against you, and your place here is secure regardless. But Sarah Owens, would you consider becoming more than my cook? Would you consider becoming my wife?" The words hung in the air between them, full of promise and hope. Sarah felt tears spill down her cheeks as she nodded. "Yes. Yes, Matthew, I would be honored to be your wife." He cupped her face gently, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. "May I kiss you, please?" she whispered. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and sweet, full of all the emotion that had been building between them. Sarah's hands came up to rest on his chest, feeling his heart pounding as hard as her own. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "I will do everything I can to make you happy," Matthew promised. "I will cherish you, Sarah. I will never make you regret saying yes." "I know," she said, believing it with her whole heart. "I know you will." They sat together as the storm gradually passed, talking about their future, making plans. Matthew wanted to marry as soon as possible. Sarah agreed, seeing no reason to wait when they both knew what they wanted. "Should we tell the men tonight?" Sarah asked. Matthew laughed. "They will be thrilled. Tom has been hinting for weeks that I should court you properly. I think they all saw where this was heading before either of us did." When they told the ranch hands the next morning at breakfast, the response was exactly as Matthew had predicted. Tom clapped Matthew on the back so hard he nearly fell into his eggs. Juan let out a whoop of joy. Pete smiled quietly but warmly. Sam, grinning from ear to ear, said it was the best news since Sarah's biscuits. "Does this mean the cooking will stay this good?" Juan asked seriously, making everyone laugh. "Yes, you fool. It means it will get even better because she will be cooking out of love," Tom said. which made Sarah blush and Matthew pull her close with obvious pride. They were married a week later in Abiquiu's small church with Mrs. Henderson helping Sarah find a proper dress, and the ranch hands serving as witnesses. Sarah wore a simple gown of cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar, her hair arranged in soft curls. When Matthew saw her walking down the aisle, his eyes shone with emotion. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Matthew kissed Sarah with such tenderness that Mrs. Henderson dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. After the wedding, there was a small celebration at the ranch. Mrs. Henderson and several other town ladies brought food, and there was music and dancing in the yard. Sarah found herself passed from one partner to another, as the ranch hands and neighbors all wanted to dance with the bride. But it was dancing with Matthew that made her heart soar. Despite his limp, he moved with grace, holding her close as they swayed to a fiddle's sweet melody. "Happy, wife," he murmured against her ear. "Happier than I ever imagined possible, husband," she replied, loving the way those words sounded. That night, after the guests had gone and the ranch had quieted, Matthew carried Sarah over the threshold of what was now their shared bedroom. He had spent the past week moving his things from his old room into the main bedroom, making space for Sarah's few belongings. The room was simple but comfortable, dominated by a large bed covered in quilts. Matthew set Sarah down gently, his hands lingering at her waist. "Are you nervous?" "A little," she admitted. "But I trust you." "I will be gentle," he promised. "We can go as slow as you need." Their wedding night was tender and sweet, full of whispered words and gentle discoveries. Matthew was patient and caring, making sure Sarah felt loved and cherished. When they finally lay together in the darkness, Sarah's head on Matthew's chest and his arms around her, she felt a peace and happiness she had never known before. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. She felt Matthew's chest rise and fall with a deep breath. "I love you too, Sarah Hammond. I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you on that platform, trying so hard to be brave." "You saved me that day," Sarah said. "You gave me more than a job. You gave me a home, a family, a future." "We saved each other," Matthew corrected gently. "I was just going through the motions before you came. You brought life back to this place, to me." The weeks that followed were blissful. Sarah continued to cook for the ranch, but now it was as Matthew's wife, not as hired help. The distinction mattered. In the way Matthew included her in decisions about the ranch. In the way the men treated her with the respect due to the lady of the house. In the small intimacies she and Matthew shared throughout each day. Matthew made good on his plans to expand the horse breeding. He purchased several fine mares and a stallion, beginning a program that he hoped would eventually supply the army with quality horses. Sarah loved watching him work with the animals, his patience and skill evident in every interaction. One afternoon in early fall, Sarah was pulling weeds from the small vegetable garden she had started near the house when she heard hoofbeats approaching fast. She looked up to see Juan riding in at a gallop, his face troubled. "Mrs. Hammond, where is the boss?" "In the north pasture checking fences." "What is wrong?" "Riders coming, a lot of them. They do not look friendly." Sarah's heart raced. "Go get Matthew, I will alert the others." By the time Matthew and the hands had gathered, a group of about 8 men had ridden into the yard. Their leader was a hard-faced man with cold eyes, and Sarah felt a chill of recognition. It was the portly man who had bid on her contract, the one with the cruel mouth. "Hammond," the man said without preamble. "I am Silas Foster. I own the Triple S Ranch to the east. We have a problem." "What problem would that be, Foster?" Matthew's voice was level but firm. He had positioned himself slightly in front of Sarah. "Your cattle have been crossing onto my land, eating my grass, drinking from my water sources. I want compensation, and I want a guarantee it will not happen again." Matthew frowned. "My cattle are well fenced and managed. If any have strayed, it was not intentional, and I will gladly make reasonable amends, but I have heard no complaints until now." "Well, you are hearing them now," Foster said, his eyes drifting to Sarah. A slow, unpleasant smile crossed his face. "I see you got more than a cook out of that auction. Smart man, Hammond, though I would have paid more if I had known she was wife material." Sarah felt Matthew tense beside her. "Watch your words, Foster. Just making an observation. You got a good deal. Fine-looking woman, and she can cook too." Foster's tone made the compliment sound like an insult. "State your business and leave my property," Matthew said, his voice hard as iron. Foster's smile faded. "I want $500 for the damage your cattle caused, and I want a written agreement that you will pay for any future incursions." "That is robbery, and you know it," Tom spoke up. "Even if some cattle strayed, there is no way they caused that much damage." "Are you calling me a liar, old man?" Foster's hand drifted toward his gun. "Everyone stay calm," Matthew said loudly. "Foster, I will investigate your claims. If my cattle damaged your property, I will pay fair compensation based on actual damage, but I will not be extorted. Now leave my land." For a tense moment, it seemed Foster might push the issue, but he apparently decided against it, perhaps recognizing that he was outnumbered on Matthew's own land. "You have 1 week, Hammond. 1 week to bring me that money, or I will take compensation in other ways." His eyes slid to Sarah again, making his threat clear. After Foster and his men had ridden off, Matthew immediately turned to Sarah. "Are you all right?" "I am fine. But Matthew, I do not trust that man. He looked at me the same way he did at the auction." "I know." Matthew's jaw was tight with anger. "He will not touch you, Sarah. I promise you that." Over the next few days, Matthew investigated Foster's claims. He rode the boundaries of his property with Tom and Pete, checking fences and looking for evidence of his cattle straying. They found some fence damage, but it appeared deliberate, as if someone had cut the wire to allow cattle through. "It is a setup," Tom said grimly. "Foster wants something, and he is creating an excuse to take it." Matthew's expression was troubled. "The question is, what does he really want? If this is about money, I could pay a reasonable amount to avoid trouble, but I think it is about more than that." Sarah, who had insisted on hearing their findings, felt sick to her stomach. "It is about me. He wanted my contract at the auction, and now he sees that you have me as your wife. He is a man who does not like to lose." "Then he had better get used to disappointment," Matthew said firmly, "because he is never getting near you." When the week was up, Matthew rode into Foster's ranch with Tom and Juan. Sarah wanted to go, but Matthew refused, worried that Foster might try something if she were present. She spent the hours of their absence pacing the house, unable to settle, praying that the confrontation would not turn violent. When Matthew returned as the sun was setting, Sarah rushed out to meet him. He dismounted and pulled her into his arms immediately. "It is handled," he said. "For now, at least." Inside, over supper, Matthew explained. "Foster demanded the $500. I offered him $100 for the fence damage, making it clear I knew he or his men had caused it themselves. He blustered and threatened, but in the end, he took the money. I think he realized that pushing further would bring in the territorial marshal, and he does not want that scrutiny." "Do you think he will leave us alone now?" Sarah asked. "I do not know," Matthew admitted, "but we will be watchful. And Sarah, I want you to stay close to the ranch for a while. Do not go anywhere alone." Sarah nodded, understanding his concern even as she chafed at the restriction. She was not used to being afraid, but Foster's cold eyes haunted her thoughts. Thankfully, the weeks passed without further incident. Foster seemed to have accepted his payment and backed off. As fall deepened into winter, life at the Double H returned to its peaceful rhythm. Sarah spent her days cooking, managing the household, and increasingly helping Matthew with the ranch records. She had a good head for figures, and Matthew appreciated her input on the business side of the ranch. It was in late November when Sarah began to suspect that she might be pregnant. She had missed her monthly courses, and her body felt different in ways she could not quite articulate. When she was certain, she waited for the perfect moment to tell Matthew. That moment came one evening after supper. The first snow of the season was falling softly outside, and Matthew was sitting by the fire, relaxed and content. Sarah sat beside him, taking his hand. "Matthew, I have something to tell you." He turned to her immediately, concern crossing his face. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. Everything is wonderful, actually." She smiled, her eyes shining. "We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Matthew just stared at her as if the words had not quite registered. Then his face transformed with joy. "A baby, Sarah, truly, truly. I am about 2 months along, I think. By late spring, you will be a father." Matthew let out a whoop of joy and pulled Sarah into his arms, holding her as if she were made of precious glass. "This is the best news, the very best news. Are you feeling all right? Do you need anything? Should you be resting more?" Sarah laughed at his sudden anxiety. "I am fine. Women have babies all the time, Matthew. I will need to take things a bit easier as I get further along, but for now I am healthy and strong." He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach, his expression full of wonder. "Our child. Sarah, I cannot believe how blessed I am." "We are both blessed," she corrected, covering his hand with her own. The news brought celebration from the ranch hands and excitement from the community. Mrs. Henderson came out to the ranch with advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. Other ranch wives visited, offering their own wisdom and support. Sarah was touched by the warmth of the community, by how she had gone from a desperate woman on an auction block to a respected member of society, a rancher's wife with a baby on the way. Winter passed quietly. Sarah's belly grew, and Matthew became increasingly protective and attentive. He insisted she not overdo things, often helping with tasks that he considered too strenuous. The ranch hands, too, treated her like delicate china, which Sarah found both amusing and touching. In March, as the snow began to melt and the first signs of spring appeared, Sarah went into labor. It was a long, difficult process, with Mrs. Henderson and 2 other experienced ranch wives attending her. Matthew paced outside the bedroom door, refusing to leave despite Tom's attempts to distract him with work. Finally, after nearly 12 hours, a baby's cry pierced the air. Mrs. Henderson opened the door, her face wreathed in smiles. "Mr. Hammond, you have a son, a healthy, strong boy." Matthew practically ran into the room. Sarah lay propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in blankets. When she saw Matthew, she smiled. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Matthew approached almost reverently. When he looked down at the baby's tiny, red face, his eyes filled with tears. "He is perfect. Sarah, you are amazing. Thank you. Thank you for this gift." "What should we name him?" Sarah asked. "I was thinking, if you approve, we could name him Henry Matthew Hammond. Henry was my father's name." "Henry Matthew Hammond," Matthew repeated, testing the sound. "I love it. Henry, welcome to the world, son." The baby seemed to respond to his father's voice, and Matthew laughed through his tears. In that moment, Sarah thought her heart might burst from happiness. She had gone from having nothing and no one to having everything that mattered, a husband she loved deeply, a healthy baby, a home, and a future full of promise. The months after Henry's birth were a whirlwind of sleepless nights and endless joy. Matthew proved to be a devoted father, helping with the baby whenever he could, despite the demands of the ranch. Sarah loved watching him with their son, the gentle way he held the tiny baby, the songs he sang in his deep voice. As Henry grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Matthew's horse breeding program took off, with the cavalry purchasing several horses at excellent prices. They were able to hire 2 more hands, easing the workload on everyone. The house itself underwent improvements, with an addition that included a proper washroom and extra bedrooms for the children Matthew and Sarah hoped to have. When Henry was 2 years old, Sarah discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1882, she gave birth to a daughter. They named her Grace Ann, and she was a beautiful baby with Sarah's blonde hair and Matthew's gray eyes. Life settled into a wonderful rhythm. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Henry grew into a sturdy, curious boy who followed his father everywhere. Grace was a happy, laughing child who loved being bounced on her mother's knee. One summer evening, when Henry was 5 and Grace was 3, the family sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Henry was playing with a wooden horse Matthew had carved for him, and Grace was content in Sarah's lap. Matthew sat beside his wife, his arm around her shoulders. "You remember the day we met?" Matthew asked quietly. Sarah leaned into him. "How could I forget? I was terrified, humiliated, convinced my life was over. I saw you up there, trying so hard to be brave, and something in my chest just tightened. I knew I had to help you, had to save you from whatever terrible situation might await." "You did save me," Sarah said, turning to look at him. "You gave me everything I have now. This life, these children, this happiness. We saved each other," Matthew said, echoing his words from their wedding night. "I was half alive before you came, Sarah. You brought me back to life." Henry looked up from his toy. "Papa, tell the story again about how you met Mama." Matthew laughed. "Again? I just told it last week." "But it is my favorite story," Henry insisted. Grace clapped her hands in agreement, though Sarah suspected she was too young to really understand. "All right," Matthew said, pulling both children close. It was a hot day in Abiquiu, and there was an auction in the town square. Sarah smiled as Matthew told the story, leaving out the more troubling details but keeping the essence. A man who saw a woman in need and decided to help. A woman who was brave enough to trust a stranger, and 2 people who found love in unexpected circumstances. As the story ended and the children begged for another, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about standing on that auction platform, feeling hopeless and afraid. She thought about Matthew's first words to her, his quiet promise to treat her fairly. She thought about falling in love over shared meals and quiet conversations, about the moment he had asked her to be his wife, about the life they had built together. "Mama, are you crying?" Henry asked, noticing the tears in Sarah's eyes. "Happy tears, sweetheart," she assured him. "Just thinking about how lucky I am to have all of you." Matthew kissed her temple. "We are the lucky ones, Sarah Hammond. Every day with you is a gift." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the family lingered on the porch, wrapped in love and contentment. The Double H Ranch stretched around them, solid and prosperous, a testament to hard work and dedication. But more than that, it was a home, filled with laughter and love, where 2 people who had found each other against all odds had built something beautiful and lasting. The years continued to pass in happiness. Henry grew into a responsible young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Grace became a spirited girl with her mother's kindness and her father's determination. When Henry was 8 and Grace was 6, Sarah gave birth to twin boys, James and John, who brought new energy and chaos to the household. The ranch expanded further. Matthew's horse breeding program gained renown throughout the territory, and the Double H became known as the place to get quality horses. Matthew hired a foreman to help manage the growing operation, allowing him more time with his family. Sarah, too, found ways to expand her role. She started a vegetable garden that grew to feed not just the ranch, but also provided produce to sell in town. She became known for her preserves and baked goods, which Mrs. Henderson sold in the general store. The money Sarah earned, though not necessary given the ranch's success, gave her a sense of independence and accomplishment. Silas Foster eventually sold his ranch and moved away, much to everyone's relief. New neighbors moved in, a young couple with children close in age to Henry and Grace, and the two families became close friends. One particularly memorable day when Henry was 12, he came running into the house with excitement. "Papa, Mama, there is going to be a 4th of July celebration in town. Can we go, please?" Matthew looked at Sarah, who smiled and nodded. "I think that sounds wonderful." The 4th of July celebration in Abiquiu was a grand affair. There were games and races for the children, food stalls, music, and dancing. In the evening, there would be fireworks brought all the way from Santa Fe. The whole town turned out, along with families from the surrounding ranches. Sarah watched as Henry and Grace participated in the children's races, cheering them on. The twins, now 4 years old, were content to watch from Matthew's arms. When the dancing began, Matthew handed the twins off to Tom, who had come to the celebration with the other ranch hands, and pulled Sarah onto the makeshift dance floor. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Hammond?" he asked with mock formality. "You may, Mr. Hammond," she replied with a smile. They danced as they had at their wedding, moving together with the ease of long practice and deep love. Around them, the community celebrated, but for Sarah and Matthew, the world had narrowed to just the two of them. "Happy?" Matthew asked, as he always did. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," Sarah replied, as she always did. As the fireworks began, exploding in brilliant colors against the night sky, the Hammond family gathered together. Henry and Grace exclaimed over each burst of light. The twins clapped with delight. Matthew held Sarah close, and she leaned into his strength. "Thank you," Sarah whispered to him. "For what?" "For bidding high that day, for calling me your wife, for giving me this beautiful life." Matthew's arm tightened around her. "I would do it again in a heartbeat. I would bid everything I owned for the chance to have you in my life. I love you, Matthew Hammond." "I love you, Sarah Hammond. Today, tomorrow, and always." The years rolled on, bringing their share of challenges and triumphs. There were harsh winters and dry summers, sick cattle and difficult foals. But through it all, Sarah and Matthew faced everything together, their love growing deeper and stronger with each passing year. When Henry turned 18, he expressed a desire to attend college in the East to study veterinary medicine. It was hard for Sarah to let him go, but Matthew encouraged their son, knowing that education would only make him a better rancher when he returned. Grace, at 16, announced she wanted to be a teacher, and Sarah helped her study for the teaching examination. The twins, now 14, were inseparable and shared their father's love of horses. They spent every free moment in the corrals, learning everything Matthew could teach them about breeding and training. One autumn evening, with the children occupied with their various pursuits, Sarah and Matthew found themselves alone on the porch, a rare occurrence in their busy household. Sarah was 43 now, and Matthew was 47, both showing the gentle signs of aging but still healthy and strong. "Do you ever think about that day?" Sarah asked. "The auction." Sometimes, Matthew admitted, I think about how different my life would be if I had not gone to town that day or if I had not had the courage to bid. I think about how close I came to a very different fate, Sarah said. If Foster had won the bid or if you had been a different kind of man. Matthew took her hand. But none of that happened. Instead, I got the greatest blessing of my life. We got 4 blessings, Sarah corrected with a smile. 5, Matthew said. The 4 children and you. You are the foundation of everything good in my life, Sarah. The ranch, the success, none of it would mean anything without you. Sarah turned to kiss him, their lips meeting with the comfortable passion of a long marriage. I feel the same way. You took a frightened woman with nothing and gave her the world. We built the world together, Matthew said firmly. Everything we have, we created as partners. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Sarah thought about the journey of her life. From Ohio to New Mexico, from desperate and alone to loved and surrounded by family, from an auction block to the porch of a prosperous ranch as the beloved wife of a good man. It had been an incredible journey. When Henry came home from college with his veterinary degree, he brought with him a young woman named Elizabeth, whom he had met in his studies. She was smart, kind, and shared Henry's love of animals. The wedding was held at the Double H, with the whole community attending. Sarah cried happy tears as she watched her firstborn marry, thinking about how the cycle of life continued. Grace became a teacher in Abiquiu, beloved by her students. She eventually married a lawyer from Santa Fe, a quiet man who adored her spirit and intelligence. Their wedding was elegant and joyful, and Sarah was proud to see her daughter so happy. The twins, at 22, showed no signs of settling down, too busy with the horses and the ranch to think about marriage. Matthew joked that they would probably end up marrying a pair of sisters, given how inseparable they were. As grandchildren began to arrive, Henry and Elizabeth's first, a girl named Sarah after her grandmother, followed by Grace's son. Sarah and Matthew's days were filled with new joy. There was something special about being grandparents, all the love with less of the daily worry. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the children threw a surprise party for Sarah and Matthew. The ranch was filled with friends, family, and neighbors, all gathering to celebrate the couple who had become pillars of the community. There were toasts and speeches, food and music, and overwhelming love. At one point in the evening, Mrs. Henderson, now elderly but still sharp as a tack, pulled Sarah aside. I knew it the first day I saw you two together in town, she said with satisfaction. I knew you were meant for each other. You were right, Sarah agreed, watching Matthew across the room holding his granddaughter, his face alight with joy. You were absolutely right. As the years passed, Sarah and Matthew gradually stepped back from the daily running of the ranch. Henry took over the main operations with help from his brothers, allowing Matthew and Sarah more time to simply enjoy life. They spent their days tending Sarah's garden, riding out to their favorite spots on the ranch, and spoiling their growing collection of grandchildren. One spring morning, Sarah woke to find Matthew already up, standing at the window watching the sunrise. She joined him, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About how I am the luckiest man who ever lived," he said simply. "I got to spend my life with my best friend, my greatest love. I got to watch our children grow and thrive. I got to build something lasting and good. What more could a man ask for?" "Nothing," Sarah agreed, leaning her head on his shoulder. "We have had a beautiful life, Matthew." "We have," he agreed, "and we still have more to live, more grandchildren to meet, more sunrises to watch, more days together." "Together," Sarah repeated, loving the word. "Always together." The Double H Ranch continued to thrive under Henry's management. The horse breeding program expanded further, gaining customers from as far away as California. The family name became synonymous with quality and integrity. But more than business success, the ranch became known as a place of love and family, where the Hammond clan gathered for holidays and celebrations, where children grew up learning the value of hard work and the importance of kindness. Sarah and Matthew lived to see their children's children grow, to meet great-grandchildren, to celebrate 50th and then 55th anniversaries. Their love, which had begun in such unlikely circumstances, remained strong and constant, a beacon for their entire family. When visitors asked Sarah about her life, about how she had ended up in New Mexico as the matriarch of a successful ranching family, she would smile and tell them the story. She never shied away from the beginning, from the auction and the desperate circumstances that had brought her there. Because that beginning had led to everything good in her life. "I stood on that auction block feeling like my life was over," she would say. "But really, it was just beginning, because that was where I met Matthew, where our story started, and what a story it has been." On a particularly beautiful autumn day, when Sarah was 70 and Matthew was 74, they sat together on their beloved porch, watching the ranch bustle with activity. Henry was in the corrals with the twins, now mature men themselves, working with a new crop of foals. Grace was visiting with her children, and the sound of young voices filled the air. "You have any regrets?" Sarah asked Matthew, a question she had never posed before. Matthew was quiet for a moment, considering. "Only one," he finally said. Sarah's heart clenched, but then he continued. "I regret that I only have one life to live with you. I wish I could have 1,000 more, each one spent by your side." Tears filled Sarah's eyes. "Matthew Hammond, you old romantic. I learned from the best," he said, kissing her softly. "You taught me what love really means, Sarah. Not just passion, though we have had plenty of that, but partnership, friendship, loyalty, the kind of love that weathers every storm and emerges stronger." "We did weather the storms, did we not?" Sarah reflected. "The drought of 1885, the hard winter of 1890, losing your good horse Jasper, my scare with pneumonia. And we made it through all of it," Matthew confirmed, "because we had each other." As the sun set on another day, Sarah and Matthew sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the ranch they had built together settle in for the night. The cattle lowed in the distance. Horses whinnied in the corrals. Somewhere in the house, grandchildren laughed and played. Sarah thought about the frightened, desperate woman she had been all those years ago, standing on an auction platform in the scorching sun. She thought about the lonely rancher who had seen past her circumstances to the person beneath. She thought about the leap of faith they had both taken, the trust they had given each other, the love that had grown from such unlikely beginnings. "Thank you," she whispered to Matthew, as she had countless times over the decades. "For what?" he asked, as he always did. "For seeing me. For choosing me, for loving me." Matthew brought her hand to his lips. "Thank you for saying yes, for staying, for building this life with me." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sarah leaned into Matthew, feeling his warmth, his steadiness, his love. They had been together for more than 4 decades, and the passion had never dimmed. If anything, it had deepened into something more profound, a love that transcended words. The Hammond legacy stretched out before them in the ranch lands, in the horses bearing their brand, in the children and grandchildren carrying their name. But more than that, it lived in the love story they had created, a story that would be told and retold through generations. A woman auctioned as a cook, a lonely rancher who bid high and called her wife. 2 unlikely people who found each other and built an empire of love. That was their story, and it was beautiful. As the night deepened, Matthew and Sarah finally rose from the porch and went inside their home, the home they had made together, filled with the echoes of decades of love and laughter. They climbed the stairs to their bedroom, moving with the careful coordination of long practice. In bed, Sarah curled into Matthew's side as she had done thousands of nights before. His arm came around her, holding her close. "Good night, my love," he whispered. "Good night, my heart," she replied. And as they drifted off to sleep together, as they would for all the remaining nights of their lives, Sarah smiled. She had started with nothing but had gained everything. She had been saved by a good man who had become so much more than her employer, more than her husband, even. Matthew Hammond was her partner, her best friend, her greatest love. And that, Sarah thought as sleep claimed her, was the best ending she could have ever imagined. Years continued to pass in peaceful contentment. Matthew and Sarah grew old together with grace, their love story becoming legend in Abiquiu and beyond. They celebrated their 60th wedding anniversary surrounded by 4 generations of family, a testament to the enduring power of the love that had begun on an auction platform so many years before. When Matthew passed away at 78, Sarah held his hand and told him one final time how much she loved him. He smiled at her and whispered, "Wait for me," before closing his eyes for the last time. Sarah kissed his forehead and promised she would. Sarah lived another 3 years, surrounded by her loving family. She spent her days in the garden Matthew had helped her plant decades before, telling stories to great-grandchildren about the rancher who had bid high and called her wife. She spoke of their love with pride and joy, ensuring that every child knew the story of how their family had begun. When Sarah passed peacefully in her sleep at 73, she was laid to rest beside Matthew on a hill overlooking the Double H Ranch. Their shared headstone bore a simple inscription: Matthew and Sarah Hammond, together in life, together in eternity. The ranch continued under Henry's leadership and eventually passed to his children. But more than the land or the business, the true legacy of Matthew and Sarah Hammond lived on in the love they had shared and the family they had created. Every Hammond child grew up knowing the story, understanding that love could be found in the most unlikely places, that kindness and courage could change everything, that 2 people who chose each other against all odds could build something beautiful and lasting. The Double H Ranch stood for generations as a reminder that sometimes the most valuable things in life come from the most unexpected circumstances. That a lonely rancher and a desperate woman on an auction block could find not just survival, but abundant joy. That love, real love, can transform everything. And so the story ended not with sadness but with celebration, with the knowledge that Sarah and Matthew Hammond had lived full, rich lives filled with love, family, and happiness. They had taken the worst moment of Sarah's life and transformed it into the beginning of a beautiful journey. They had proven that love could conquer fear, that trust could bridge divides, that 2 souls meant for each other would always find their way. Their story was told and retold, a favorite family legend that reminded every generation that love was worth fighting for, that kindness mattered, and that sometimes, just sometimes, fairy tales could come true even in the rough and tumble world of the Wild West. The end.